I was dying. The cold floor beneath me was wet with my own blood, my breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. My body trembled, weak from the pain, but my mind refused to shut down. I could still hear their laughter, his laughter, echoing in my ears. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted, stood above me, watching as life drained from my body. He wasn't alone. His accomplices, the same people who had once welcomed me into their world, looked on without a shred of remorse. My family was already gone, ruined beyond repair, and I had been nothing more than a pawn in his game. Did you really think I loved you? His voice dripped with amusement, his smile laced with cruelty. You were useful, that's all. But now? You're nothing. I wanted to scream, to curse him, to fight back. But my body wouldn't move. My vision blurred, my fingers twitched, and I knew I was losing. He had won. He had destroyed me, taken everything from me, and I had let him. No, not again. I won't die like this. I won't let this be my ending. As darkness pulled me under, I made a vow. If I ever got another chance, I would not be the fool I had been in this life. I would destroy him before he had the chance to destroy me. This time I would make him pay. I woke up gasping for air, my heart pounding against my ribs as if it was trying to break free. I clutched my throat, feeling my own pulse beneath my fingertips. I was alive. The air smelled different. My body felt different. My hands, smooth, unscarred, untainted by the brutal death I had suffered, clutched the soft fabric of a familiar blanket. I recognized it immediately. This was my room. My old room. The one I had lived in before everything went to hell. Before my world shattered. I scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over myself as I lunged toward the mirror. The face staring back at me was younger, my younger self. My lips trembled, my fingers tracing over my features. It wasn't a dream. I was reborn. A slow, eerie smile spread across my lips. This time things would be different. The first thing I did was check the date. My hands trembled as I stared at the calendar. I had been sent back. Far enough that the nightmare hadn't begun yet, but close enough that I knew what was coming. I knew his lies, his manipulations, his deceit. And this time I would not fall for them. I had played the role of the naive, love-struck fool once before. I had believed his words, his promises, his affection, only to watch him rip everything away from me. Not again. I had the knowledge of the future. I had the upper hand, and I was going to make him suffer. The first time I saw him again, my stomach twisted. He was exactly as I remembered, charming, confident, with that same easy smile that had once made my heart flutter. But now all I felt was cold, burning hatred. Hey! He greeted me just like he had the first time. His eyes held warmth, fake warmth. I knew what was behind them now. I smiled back, forcing innocence into my expression. Hey! His betrayal hadn't happened yet. He thought I was still the same gullible girl who would fall into his trap. He didn't know that I had already seen his true face. He didn't know that I was no longer his pawn. Are you okay? He asked, tilting his head slightly. You seem different. I let out a small laugh, pretending to brush it off. Doi. He smiled, but I could see it now, the way his eyes calculated everything. He was already planning, already twisting his web of deception. Let him. Let him think he has control. Let him believe I'm still under his spell. Because when the time came, I would rip his world apart just like he had once ripped apart mine. And this time he wouldn't see it coming. I kept my smile in place, the same innocent one he had always fallen for. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't smiling out of love or admiration. I was smiling because I knew exactly who he was and what he was planning. It was surreal standing before him again, hearing the same words he had once spoken to me, the same carefully crafted lies. Back then I had been blind to his deceit, but now I could see through him like glass. Every soft touch, every lingering glance, every charming smile. It was all an illusion, a performance meant to pull me deeper into his trap. But now I was playing the role. I let him believe I was still the same foolish girl, still eager to be his, still desperate for his love. I mirrored his expressions, let my laughter echo his, let my eyes shine with the same adoration I had once felt for him. He had no idea that every moment I spent beside him, every word I spoke, was a step closer to his downfall. He thought he was leading the game. He had no idea I was the one controlling it now. The first test came sooner than expected. I was at lunch with him, sitting across the same table where I had once fallen deeper in love with his lies. This was the moment where, in my previous life, I had trusted him blindly, hanging on to his every word, believing that he saw me as someone special. But I knew better now. You know, he started, leaning closer, his voice just low enough to sound intimate. I feel like we're really meant for each other. I almost laughed. The exact same line. Word for word. Back then my heart had raced, my cheeks had burned with excitement, and I had felt like the luckiest girl in the world. Now I only felt disgust. But I couldn't show it. Not yet. Instead, I tilted my head, feigning shyness, and replied softly, "Do you really think so?" His smile widened. "Of course. You're different from the rest. You understand me. Different from the rest." I had been so naive, believing that lie, thinking I was special. In reality, he had probably fed this same line to a dozen other girls before me. I was never special to him, I was just useful. I would let him believe I was still useful. "Oh," I said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, my voice filled with uncertainty. I don't know. My family." His eyes flickered. He leaned back slightly, hiding the momentary sharpness that flashed in his expression. "Your family." There it was. In my past life, this was when he had started his slow manipulation, planting seeds of doubt about my family, isolating me from them. He had made me believe that they didn't truly care for me, that they only wanted to control me. And I had believed him. I had been so eager for love, so desperate for someone to choose me over everything else, that I had let him twist my mind against the people who had loved me the most. Not this time. This time I would turn the tables. I want them to trust you," I said hesitantly, watching him carefully. "I want them to see how amazing you are." His mask stayed in place, but I knew him too well now. He wasn't happy with my answer. In my past life, I had immediately started pulling away from my family, distancing myself, letting him be my whole world. But now I was making him believe that I wanted him and my family to be close. That was a problem for him, because if my family was involved, his manipulations wouldn't work as easily. But he adapted quickly. He smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand, playing the part of the perfect boyfriend. "They'll love me," he said smoothly. "I'll make sure of it." "Liar." I smiled back, squeezing his hand just a little, just enough to make him believe I was falling for him again. "I know you will." Let him think he was winning. Let him believe I was still his to control. The longer he believed it, the sweeter his downfall would be. The second test came a few nights later. My family had invited him over for dinner, just like they had in my past life. I had been so excited back then, so eager for them to love him the way I did. I had been blind to the way he had been observing them, analyzing them, looking for weaknesses to exploit. But now I was observing him. I watched the way his eyes lingered on my father's office, the way he studied my mother's jewelry, the way he smiled too easily at my younger sibling. He was collecting information, searching for ways to manipulate, to twist them just as he had twisted me before. Not this time. This time I would protect them. I would not let them fall into his trap. "You know," I said casually during dinner, keeping my voice light, "my father is considering hiring a private investigator for our company." I wasn't sure if it was true, but I needed to see his reaction. Caught it. The slight stiffening of his posture, the momentary flicker of calculation in his eyes. He laughed smoothly, masking it well. "Oh, that's interesting. Why would he need that?" I shrugged. "Security reasons. He doesn't trust people easily." The message was clear. I was watching him. He didn't know how much I remembered. He didn't know how much power I held now. But he knew something had changed. He wasn't as comfortable as before, and that was exactly what I wanted. As the night ended, he pulled me aside, his fingers lightly gripping my wrist. "You seem different lately." I widened my eyes innocently. "Doi." He studied me, his gaze sharp. "Yeah, I don't know. It's like you're holding something back." I let out a soft laugh, pretending to be flustered. "I guess I just don't want to mess this up." His smile returned, but there was something else behind it now. Something more cautious. He thought he knew everything about me. He thought I was still the same girl who would fall at his feet, Who would believe his every word? He was wrong. Because this time I was the one leading the game. And soon he would know what it felt like to lose everything. I was winning. The game had begun, and I had taken control without him even realizing it. He still thought he was leading, still believed I was the same foolish girl who would fall for his every lie. But little by little I was dismantling his world. I watched as he tried to weave his manipulations, subtly isolating me from my family, convincing me to trust only him, just as he had done before. But this time I let him believe it was working. He didn't know that every step he took, I had already anticipated. Every lie he told, I had already prepared my countermove. I was leading him into his own trap step by step, and he was walking straight into it. The first real test of my plan came when I decided to push him, just enough to see how deep his deception ran. I arranged a meeting between him and my father, something that had never happened in my past life. Before, I had been so blinded by love that I had never questioned why he always avoided real conversations with my family. But now I knew the truth. He never wanted them to see his true face, because he knew they would see through him. This time I made sure he had no choice. "Dad wants to have dinner with us," I said casually, watching his reaction. His smile remained in place, but I saw the brief flicker of tension in his eyes. "Oh? That's unexpected." I tilted my head, pretending to be clueless. "Why? You always say you want to be part of the family. This is your chance." I had thrown his own words back at him, and I saw the subtle way his jaw clenched. He recovered quickly, giving me that same charming, disarming grin that had once made me weak. "Of course. I'd love to. Liar." I smiled back, pretending to believe him. "Great. Tomorrow at 7. He had no idea that this was a test. The dinner was a disaster, for him at least. I watched as my father asked direct, no-nonsense questions about his intentions, about his career, about his past. I saw the discomfort in his eyes, the way he tried to deflect, to charm his way through, but my father wasn't falling for it. Neither was I. The moment that sealed it for me was when my father asked about his family. "You never talk about them," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Why is that?" I saw it then, the briefest hesitation, the flicker of panic. In my past life I had never noticed it. But now I was looking for it. And there it was. "My family is complicated," he finally said, offering a tight smile. "It's not something I like to talk about." That was a lie. A carefully constructed one. And I knew exactly why. His family had never existed. That was one of the things I had uncovered when I started digging into his past. He had no records, no real history, nothing concrete. Everything he had told me in my previous life had been fabricated. A web of lies carefully designed to make him appear as someone he wasn't. And now I had caught him in it. I played my role perfectly, reaching for his hand and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I understand," I said softly, pretending to be the supportive girlfriend I had once been. He squeezed my hand back, his relief evident. He thought he had fooled me. He had no idea that I was the one fooling him. Later that night, as we walked together, he finally spoke. "Your dad doesn't like me," he said, letting out a small laugh. "I can tell." I smiled slightly. "He's just protective." "Of course," he said smoothly, his fingers trailing over my wrist. "But you trust me, don't you?" In my past life I had said yes without hesitation. Now I looked him in the eyes, smiled, and lied right back. "Of course." I wasn't done yet. The next step was even more dangerous. I had to find out who else was involved in my family's destruction, because he hadn't done it alone. And I was starting to suspect that the betrayal ran deeper than I had originally thought. I began watching his movements more closely, following his patterns, subtly steering our conversations in ways that made him slip up. And then one night I caught him in a lie so big, so obvious that I knew. Someone else had been pulling the strings all along. I had asked him an innocent question. "Do you remember the first time we met?" I said playfully, resting my chin on my hand. He smiled, tilting his head as if recalling the memory. "Of course. It was at the charity gala, remember? You were wearing that beautiful blue dress, and I couldn't take my eyes off you." He was lying, because I remembered the truth. I had never worn blue that night. I had worn red. I had worn it because he had told me he loved that color. but he had mixed me up with someone else. And that's when I knew there had been another girl. Someone else had been involved in my downfall. Someone who had been whispering in his ear, helping him destroy me and my family. My blood ran cold. I had spent all this time preparing to destroy him, to turn the game against him. But now I realized he wasn't the only enemy I had to fight. There was someone else out there. Someone I hadn't accounted for. And I needed to find out who it was. Before they found me first. My world had shifted. For so long my focus had been on him. On the man who had shattered my life, manipulated me, and used me as a pawn to destroy my family. But now I knew the truth. He wasn't acting alone. Someone else had been in the shadows, pulling the strings alongside him. Someone I had never suspected. And now I needed to find out who they were before they struck again. I started by retracing my past. Who had been closest to me? Who had the most to gain from my downfall? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My best friend. It made sense in a way that was sickening. In my past life, she had always been there. Comforting me, supporting me, whispering words of doubt about my family, making me feel like she was the only one I could trust. At the time, I had believed she was my savior. But what if she had been his partner all along? The idea sent a chill down my spine. If she had betrayed me once, she could do it again. And this time, I was going to make her reveal herself. Played it carefully. If she really was involved, I couldn't let her know I suspected anything. So, I did what I had done with him. I pretended to be the same naive girl she had once known. I acted like I was still under his spell, that I was still lost in my love for him. And it worked. She started opening up to me again, slipping back into the role of the supportive best friend. "Tina," she said one afternoon, her voice full of fake concern. I don't want you to get hurt again." I gave her a small, hesitant smile. "I know. I love him so much." Her eyes flickered with something she tried to hide, but I caught it. Was it satisfaction? Relief? She thought she had me fooled. She had no idea I was leading her straight into my trap. The real test came when I decided to feed her false information. I wanted to see what she would do with it. One evening while we sat in my room, I let out a deep sigh, acting as though something was bothering me. She immediately perked up, waiting for me to spill whatever was on my mind. "I don't know," I said softly. "I just feel like something's off. Like, maybe he's hiding something from me." Her reaction was immediate. "What do you mean?" I shrugged, playing with the hem of my shirt. "I overheard something. About a money. And my family." Her eyes widened just for a moment before she masked it. "Money?" I nodded, watching her carefully. "I don't know. I could be wrong. But I think my father is planning to investigate him. Maybe even hire someone to look into his past." Silence. She shifted slightly, clearing her throat. "I mean, that sounds serious. Do you think your dad will actually do it?" There it was. She was worried. Because if my father actually did investigate, the whole scheme would start falling apart. I smiled inwardly. That was all the confirmation I needed. She was involved. She had been feeding him information about me. I had her exactly where I wanted her. Now it was time to set the trap. I continued playing my role, letting her believe I was still clueless. But behind the scenes, I started preparing my next move. I arranged for an accidental slip of information to reach him, something that would make him panic. And it worked. A few days later, he came to me, his usual calm demeanor shaken. "Tina," he said, taking my hands in his. "I need to ask you something." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "What is it? Did he mention anything about investigating me?" "Gotcha." I widened my eyes, pretending to be confused. "What? No. Why would he do that?" His jaw tightened. He was trying to read me, trying to figure out if I was lying. But I had played this role perfectly. He saw nothing but a girl who was still madly in love with him. I don't want anything to come between us," he said, forcing a smile. "Maybe we should be more careful about how we talk about things." I nodded quickly, pretending to be scared. "Of course. I don't want my dad to ruin what we have." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good. Just be careful, okay?" He kissed my forehead before leaving. And the moment he was gone, I dropped the act. He had fallen for it, just like she had. They were both guilty, and soon they would both pay for it. The night of my best friend's betrayal came sooner than expected. I had set up a meeting with her, just the two of us in the same cafe where we had always gone when we needed to talk. She thought she was coming to comfort me. She thought I was still her puppet, still the fool who trusted her completely. But tonight she was going to face the truth. She arrived late, her face filled with feigned concern. "Hey Tina. You sounded upset over the phone. What's going on?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching her. Then I set the cup down and leaned forward. "I know everything." She blinked, confusion flickering in her expression. "What do you mean?" I smiled, but it wasn't warm. "I know what you did. I know you were working with him. I know you've been feeding him information about me, about my family. I know you helped him destroy me in my past life." Her face drained of color. "Tina, don't lie to me." My voice was calm, but it was sharp enough to cut through steel. "I set a trap and you walked right into it. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She knew she had been caught. The betrayal in my heart burned, but I didn't let it show. I had already mourned the friendship I thought we had. This wasn't about emotions anymore. This was about justice. "You helped him ruin my family," I continued, my voice unwavering. "You watched as he used me, manipulated me, turned me into a fool. And you stood by and let it happen. Why?" She looked down, her hands trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "I didn't know it would go that far." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And yet, you kept helping him. Even now, you're still lying to me." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. Because I wasn't done yet. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm going to make sure you both pay. And when I'm done, you'll wish you had never betrayed me." She gasped, her hands clutching the edge of the table. "Tina, please." I stood up, looking down at her one last time. "It's already too late." And with that, I walked away, leaving her to drown in the consequences of what she had done. She was scared now. I could see it in her trembling hands, the way she refused to meet my eyes, the nervous glances she stole whenever she thought I wasn't watching. My so-called best friend, the girl who had once smiled in my face while stabbing me in the back, knew the end was coming. And I was going to make sure she suffered every second of it. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. She and he had worked together to destroy me once before. They had taken my family, my reputation, my life. But now I was the one holding the knife. And I wasn't just going to cut them down. I was going to burn their entire world to the ground. The best way to destroy a powerful enemy? Make them destroy themselves. I started with him. Over the next few days, I subtly fed him lies, just as he had once done to me. I planted small doubts, made quiet comments about how my best friend had been acting strangely, about how she had slipped up and mentioned things she shouldn't have known. "She's really close to my dad lately," I mused one afternoon while we were having coffee. "I don't know why, but they've been talking a lot." I watched as his fingers twitched slightly on his cup, his mind already racing. I knew how his paranoia worked. In my past life, he had made me distrust my own family, had made me push them away so that I had nowhere else to turn but him. Now I was making him feel the same suffocating fear. "She mentioned something weird the other day," I added, sipping my drink casually. "Something about knowing things before they happen. I guess she just notices a lot of things." I saw the moment the seed of doubt took root in his mind. He smiled, but it was forced. "Yeah, she's always been observant." "Good. Let him think about it. Let him wonder. Let him believe that the person he trusted the most might be the one betraying him now." I was patient. I didn't rush things. I let them stew in their own paranoia. Soon enough, they started pulling away from each other. My best friend, no, my enemy, was no longer as confident around him. She avoided conversations, hesitated before answering his questions. And he was watching her now. Not with trust, not with affection, but with suspicion. I had turned them against each other just like they had once turned me against my family. It was poetic. And it was only the beginning. Destroying them in private wasn't enough. I wanted the world to see. They had ruined my reputation, had made me out to be a fool. Now it was my turn to return the favor. I arranged for everything to come crashing down at an event. The same kind of elegant, high-status party where they had once flaunted their power over me. I made sure they were both there. I made sure all the right people were listening. And then I dropped the bomb. "Oh, you haven't heard?" I said sweetly to a group of wealthy investors who had once worked with my family. "He's under investigation. I'm sure the authorities will find something interesting." The reaction was immediate. The murmurs started, whispers growing louder as people turned to look at him. His face paled, his jaw clenched, and I knew he wanted to drag me away, to stop me from saying anything more. But he couldn't, because I wasn't finished. And then I turned to her. "And you?" I let my voice trail off, making sure every eye in the room was on her. "You really shouldn't have underestimated me." She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, I dropped the final dagger. I pulled out my phone, clicked play, and let the recording speak for itself. Her own words, her own voice, admitting to everything. The betrayals, the manipulation, the lies. Everything was out in the open now. And there was no going back. They had no allies left. No reputation. No power. The people who had once admired them, who had once laughed at me, now turned their backs on them, whispering behind their hands, shaking their heads in disgust. I watched as my best friend, no, my enemy, stood frozen in horror, her hands shaking as she realized that everything she had built was crumbling. And he? For the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. Not just anger. Not just annoyance. Fear. Because he finally understood. He had lost. And I had won. I found him alone later that night. He was sitting in the darkness, his head in his hands, his perfect world now nothing more than ashes. I stepped closer, savoring the moment. "Feels terrible, doesn't it?" He looked up, his expression filled with something I had never seen before. Desperation. "Tina," he whispered, his voice raw. "You don't have to do this." I laughed softly. "Oh, but I do." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. "I never meant to hurt you." I tilted my head. "And yet you did. Over and over again." I leaned down, lowering my voice to a whisper. "You destroyed me. Used me. Laughed at me when I had nothing left." I met his gaze, my eyes cold, unforgiving. "Now you'll know how it feels." "Tina, please." I turned away. "Goodbye." And I walked away, leaving him in the ruins of the life he had built on my pain. It was over. For the first time in 2 lives I was free. I had taken everything from them, just as they had once taken everything from me. Their reputation, their power, their carefully constructed lies. All of it had crumbled into nothing. And yet, as I stood alone in the aftermath watching the wreckage I had created, a strange emptiness settled inside me. I had won. So why did it feel like something was still missing? Days passed, and the news of their downfall spread like wildfire. My best friend, no, my enemy, had vanished from the public eye, her former friends turning on her just as she had once turned on me. And him? He had lost everything. His business deals collapsed, his supporters abandoned him, and now he was nothing more than a cautionary tale. A man who had flown too close to the sun and burned alive in his own greed. I had expected satisfaction, a deep and lasting fulfillment in knowing they were suffering. And for a while it was enough.
Until the nightmare started.
I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as memories of my past life clawed their way back into my mind. The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal. No matter how much I had changed the story in this life, the scars of the past hadn't faded. Could they ever? Had I truly won if I was still haunted by the ghost of the girl I once was? I tried to shake the feeling that something was still wrong, that the game wasn't over yet. And then the letter arrived. A single crisp envelope left at my doorstep. No return address. No sender. Just my name written in elegant, almost taunting handwriting. I hesitated for a moment before opening it, my stomach twisting as I unfolded the paper inside. "Congratulations on your victory, my dear. But did you really think this was the end?" My blood ran cold. The letter continued. "He was never the real mastermind. You only took down a puppet. The real enemy has been watching you this entire time. And now? Now it's your turn to play my game." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't over. The person who had orchestrated everything, the destruction of my family, my suffering in my past life, was still out there. And they had just challenged me to find them. I clenched the letter in my fist, my body trembling. Not with fear, but with newfound purpose. I had thought revenge would be the end of my story, but now it was clear. This was just the beginning.